A king lost at sea for 10 years. Monsters, witches, a journey home that should have taken weeks. This is the story of Odysseus, and for centuries everyone assumed it was just that, a story. Homer supposedly sang it 400 years after it was said to have happened. No writing, just memory, passed mouth to mouth for generations. For most of history, nobody knew where any of it took place, if it took place at all. Then, in 1870, a businessman named Heinrich Schliemann did something historians thought was reckless. He grabbed a shovel and started digging in what is now Turkey. What he found stunned everyone. Not one city, 9 cities stacked on top of each other, spanning 4,000 years. This was Troy, a real place sitting exactly where Homer said it would be. But finding the city was only the first question. Did a war actually happen here? In one layer, the one archaeologists call Troy 7a, they found the arrowheads to prove it, and signs of fire, and skeletons left unburied in the rubble. Someone burned this city to the ground and never came back to bury the dead. Then came the second piece of evidence, not from Greece, from the Hittites, a rival empire next door who kept meticulous written records. Buried in their archives was a treaty signed with the king of a city called Wilusa, a name that sounds a lot like a much more familiar one, Ilios, Troy. And Wilusa's king had a name too, Alexandu. Say it slowly, Alexander. The other name for a Trojan prince you might know, Paris. A real treaty, a real king, with the same name as the man the legend blames for starting the whole war. The Hittite letters go further. They mention constant tension over Wilusa with a rival power across the sea, a people they called the Ahiyawa. Say that name out loud enough times and you get something closer to a name Homer used constantly, the Achaeans, Homer's word for the Greeks. A real city on a real trade route, a real king named Alexander, a real rival power called something very close to Achaean. This was not supposed to add up so well. Here's why any of this mattered enough to fight over. Troy sat at the mouth of a narrow strait, the only water route between the Aegean Sea and the rich trade routes to the east. Whoever controlled this narrow gate controlled the flow of copper, tin, grain, and gold moving in both directions. That is worth fighting over. 10 years of siege for one woman is not. So archaeologists now believe the real conflict was never about love. It was about controlling a choke point that made an entire civilization rich. A war did likely happen here, just not the one written in the poem. No wooden horse, no 10-year siege for a stolen queen. Something smaller, something colder, a fight over trade. But that still leaves the second half of the story, the impossible journey home. A 10-year voyage, monsters at every turn. Was any of that real or purely invented? Ancient sailors described a monster named Charybdis that swallowed entire ships in a whirlpool. Today, we know a real strait between Italy and Sicily with a genuinely dangerous tidal whirlpool in almost exactly that spot. Sailors who survived it probably came home with a story, and after a few retellings, a whirlpool became a monster. The one-eyed Cyclops may have started the same way. Sailors near volcanic islands in the Mediterranean sometimes found massive circular openings in rock formations, caves that looked, from a distance, disturbingly like a single giant eye. Enough strange islands, enough near-death encounters, enough retellings around enough campfires, and an ordinary hazardous coastline slowly grew into a monster-filled underworld. Even Ithaca, Odysseus's home, is a real plain little island. Archaeologists still argue about which one it actually was, because it simply is not that unusual. No temple to a hero named Odysseus has ever been confirmed. No tomb, no definitive proof a king by that exact name ever lived. Some pieces of this story may be entirely invented. Which leaves us with an uncomfortable, honest answer. Some of this story is real. Some of it never happened at all. And most of it sits somewhere in between. A real war fought over trade, not love. A real king whose name survived 3,000 years buried in someone else's archive. A real coastline, dangerous enough to invent monsters for. And a story so good it is still packing theatres more than 3,000 years later. Homer never had a shovel, or a Hittite archive, or a satellite map. He just had a story worth remembering. And somehow, the sand kept quiet enough for us to check.